Good afternoon, everyone. We'd like to welcome you to our webinar. Today, it's called AGSA Webinar on Municipal Audit Outcomes. As the NSG, we like bringing this kind of discussions whereby we bring the AG to discuss with key portfolios around the issues of the audit so that we better improve the audit outcomes. So this is the opportunity for us to engage in a nice environment where we're allowed to ask questions from the AG and understand how we can improve on our audit outcomes. So I would like to welcome everyone to this session and to also indicate that everyone will be allowed to ask questions under the Q&A section. They can be able to write their questions, which will be responded to at the appropriate time. My name is Pindile Mkwanazi. I'm a DDG Learning and Professional Development at the National School of Government. Our key speaker today is Ms. Sharon Adams. We will introduce her just now again. So welcome our principal who's also on the platform and all other DGs and senior management that is here and all other colleagues as well. We really appreciate our presence in this webinar. As I said, our program will we will have a presentation from Ms. Sharon Adams, followed by a section for Q&A. So we encourage you that as the presentation is going ahead, you write your questions on the Q&A section so that they can be answered during the question and answer where we will discuss them. We will also be running a Mentimeter at this time, asking you about 3 questions, and we'll share with you the results of those questions, how you answered. This is an anonymous response, so no one will know who has said what. So we'll appreciate your inputs there so that we can understand more how you feel about those questions. Mainly the questions that we'll be asking is to try and figure out the citizens' feelings on the pressure of the rising unemployment, increasing fuel costs, and cost of living. So the questions, you will find them. A shortened question will say, do you think that your municipality is making life easier for you? And then the other question is going to be the city of Tshwane, Gauteng, city of Johannesburg, city of Ekurhuleni, city of Cape Town, and Nelson Mandela Bay were all downgraded below the investment grade by 30 June 2021. And the question will be, what does this mean for small businesses and macro enterprises if cities lose their investment grading? So we just want your inputs around this question. And as well, the last question would be, what do you think the NSG can play in improving the audit outcomes? So we'd like you to participate when we start the Mentimeter, and we'll share the results at the end of the session. Now, to introduce our speaker for today, which is Sharon Adams. Sharon is a business executive, Office of the Auditor General, Western Cape. Sharon was appointed as the head of portfolio at the AG on the 1st of October 2021, leading 3 provinces, business units, the Free State, Northern Cape, and Western Cape. Sharon hails from the Eastern Cape and holds a BCom accounting degree from the University of Western Cape and an honors in theory of accounting. She qualified as a chartered accountant in 2003, and after completing her articles at Ernst & Young. Thereafter, she joined Gokisi's in Nsaluba as a forensic audit manager. Then in 2002, she joined AG for the first time as an audit manager. She later moved to the City of Cape Town as a director, audit governance and investigations and support. She loves and passionate for the public sector, hence she went back to the AG again. In 2007, she was appointed as a senior manager. In 2012, she was appointed as a deputy business unit leader. In 2014, she was appointed as a business unit leader for the Western Cape after a short period of acting in that role. Again, she was requested to act in the head of portfolio role that she is now occupying. This is a short description of the leader demonstrated. This is a short description of the leader, demonstrates her passion, ambition as a vibrant and energetic individual with excellent interpersonal and technical skills. Her guiding principles in life are integrity, honesty, dedication, and has a high work ethics. She has the ability to motivate her team members to greater heights in their journey of development. Sharon is also married. She has her husband is Quentin, and she has 2 daughters, Amy and Cindy. They support her very much in her career and their strength. Among others, her key responsibility currently is to maintain effective stakeholder relationship with the premier, speakers, national and provincial, ministers and chairs of standing committee in pursuance of the AG's strategic objectives of influencing and sustaining clean administration in the public sector. Whilst participating in the development of the AG strategy to ensure that the alignment to the organizational strategy across the 3 provinces, growing and developing leaders in addition to finding smarter ways of doing things, underpins all her key responsibilities. This is a nice profile of Sharon. Sharon, we're so excited to have you here and to learn more from you, from your experience and what AG is planning and how it wants to support the public sector. Today we're focusing on local government, but to understand how we can improve. We know the narrative out there is not good when it comes to the local government. So we want to be able to improve the narrative and have better results in our audits. So we look forward to you sharing your experience and how AG can help us. Thank you. I'm handing over to Sharon now.
Thank you so much, Pandile, for that hearty welcome, and good afternoon to the principals, the DGs, and all senior officials part of this call. What a privilege it is for me to be here this afternoon on this wonderful Friday afternoon in order to share with you the local government audit outcomes for the 2020-2021 year. Important to note what I wanted to indicate to you, we've got our general report that's currently available on our website. So I am going to encourage you, if you have the time available, to go to that document and to read such rich insights that is that's included in that general report. It's not a lengthy document, it's not a long document, but I assure you, as soon as you pick up this document, you would not want to leave it, because there's really some great and some focused insights that I do believe those insights that's in there, it will take us basically to the next level, and it clearly articulates what are the current challenges that we are experiencing in local government and what are the things that need to change for us then to see the culture shift and also the intended change that we want to see when it comes to service delivery of our citizens. So today, really, as I will be taking you through these audit outcomes on a very high level and just painting the picture based on our experience on the ground, what we've experienced for the current year, and we'll be able to be in a position just to share some insights and some stories with you regarding the past cycle that we've just passed. So as the AGSA, one of our key strategic intent is that we want to make a difference to the lives of citizens, and we want to make sure that the work that we do does have that intended impact. And for this current year, what our call is to make sure capable leadership to demonstrate the change to strengthening transparency and accountability. And I think that is our key message for this general report this year. As I will start the presentation, I want us immediately go to the third slide that speaks about the accountability ecosystem. And I will just spend some time in this specific slide to talk about this ecosystem and what it basically means. And I think what is critically important in looking at this accountability ecosystem, it has a quite important role to play. And this system quite important because each different role players have their distinct role and responsibility that they've got to play. So if I can start from the left side of this important accountability ecosystem. And what we are saying that each role player that's part of the system has a important role, a distinct role, but also complementary role that they've got to play. And as we start with the local government, which is MFMA, and we clearly see in the MFMA how it's articulated specific roles and responsibilities that officials and senior management have in ensuring that proper records are maintained, making sure there's daily and monthly reconciliation as part of their role and responsibility. Then the next person as part of this ecosystem is the municipal manager / accounting officer that also clearly depicts in the MFMA key roles and responsibilities that the municipal manager has to play. The municipal manager is ultimately responsible to make sure there's a functioning internal audit unit whose roles and responsibilities also depicted in the MFMA in terms of sections 165, where they basically look at the internal control environment and look at the effectiveness of that internal control environment. And then also the audit committee that has an oversight role over the internal audit unit as part of this accountability ecosystem. Linked to that is also the role that the mayor and the speaker plays that is also clearly articulated in terms of the MFMA legislation of the role that they've got to play in terms of their oversight role. And some of those roles and responsibility, when we go back in terms of the mayor's role when it comes to the approval of the budget and tabling the budget at council, and then ultimately also the municipal public accounts has also a key role to play in this regard. And one some of the key roles and responsibility, they would basically look in terms of the annual report, looking at the oversight role of that annual report and do a yearly oversight report on the annual report that is ultimately then adopted by council. And also an important role that they play is our findings that we report on a yearly basis to make sure there's corrective action both from an internal audit and external audit perspective finding. And then we've got council ultimately having to oversee all of this process. As an office, what we then started to do differently also this year is to look at the role of oversight and what role oversight plays as part of this accountability ecosystem, because we realized that oversight plays a critical, important role. So we started to look at the roles of the premiers, the cooperative governance, the treasuries, and basically when we were looking at this to say, when we go to the various section of the legislation, what is expected of these key role players and are they basically fulfilling their roles and responsibility? If we go back again to the MSA, it's very clearly articulate the role of the MEC of COCTA, that these got to table on a yearly basis an oversight report of the municipalities at a specific period of time in the provincial legislature. And when we actually looked at the provincial legislature in terms of their role that they have got to play and also Parliament in making sure they keep the MECs accountable for their roles and responsibility. So what we have found that in most of the instances where these reports had to be tabled, it's either they were tabled too late or they were not tabled at all, which basically comes back to that certain oversight function that was supposed to happen did not happen as intended. So that was one of the key things that we highlight where specific attention needs to be given in terms of these oversight reports that have been tabled and making sure when these things are tabled that the appropriate action is taken with the tabling of the reports. I think important to note when we're looking at all of this, as AGSA, we're as the center of this accountability ecosystem, because ultimately we audit and report on all the stakeholders that's then part of the accountability ecosystem. And we believe by us basically doing this work, we will be able then to provide the appropriate insights. And by making sure that we've got the appropriate insight, we will then be able to influence the leadership to take the appropriate action to make the correct choices. And ultimately, if that is not achieved, we've also got our extended powers where we will make sure where accountability is not driven within the system, that we will basically be using our material irregularity process. And as I will be going through the presentation, I will be touching on how we've used these extended powers in different ways as part of this accountability ecosystem. But to make this accountability ecosystem very successful, active citizenry is critically important. And I think we see if citizens also play their part in this accountability ecosystem, because ultimately the service delivery happens with the citizens. And if they don't experience that service delivery on the ground, what are they doing about it? So they've got also a very key role to play as part of this accountability ecosystem. So it's our belief is if each role player that has the distinct role as part of this accountability ecosystem play their roles in responsibility, we will basically be able then to get the intended impact and a change in terms of the public sector culture when it comes to accountability and transparency and governance and performance of reporting. If I can immediately then go over to the next slide. And with the next slide, important to note, we basically looked at the administration over the 5-year period, the previous administration that started in 16-17, that ended off the prior year, and in which partly parcel this outcomes relates to the previous administration. I think important to note before I just go into the detail, what is this information telling us and what is this data that we've got on the table telling us? Important to note, when we normally audit and report, there's normally 3 areas that we focus on. First of all, we look at the credibility of the financial information. Secondly, we look at compliance to laws and regulation. And thirdly, also we look at the credibility of the performance information that's produced. Over and above that, as part of the audit report, we also include any internal control deficiencies that would lead to any of these findings that we picked up. And the last part also, we also look at the material irregularity part, where basically where we've used our extended powers and where we've reported material irregularities in the audit report. So in a nutshell, when you look at our audit report, those are the key elements that's included in the audit report. Now, when we're reflecting on these outcomes, looking at from the previous administration to the current years of 2021, we see no improvement in the audit outcomes. And the reason why we're saying that, yes, we move from 33 clean audits to 41. If we look overall in terms of the outcomes, there's still a big number of our municipalities sitting in the qualified zone and in this claim zone. And when I go to a later slide, I will further demonstrate why we of the opinion for the previous administration currently that we don't see an improvement in the audit outcome. And I will speak to a slide later also that will demonstrate this further. I want you maybe to remember when I speak to that slide later on, in total, when we were looking at the information, we've got 41 clean audits. No? And one of the things with clean audits that, yes, they've got credible financial information, credible performance information. However, in certain cases, there is still challenges on service delivery. But at least the difference is that they're able to respond to those challenges much quicker because of the system of internal control in place, and the system is able then to pick up any of these key challenges. I think also noting, if I can maybe start with the 9 outstanding audits, and we've seen now over the last couple of years in terms of the discipline of late submission of financial statements in some of our municipalities across some of the provinces, that we find more and more that this discipline is currently not appropriately installed. And we had some big challenges, specifically in the Free State Business Unit, the Northwest, the Northern Cape, even Western Cape. We had a couple of municipalities that submitted late. So at this stage also, there is still municipalities who has outstanding financial statements, mainly in the Free State and then in the Northern Cape that has 1 outstanding financial statements. that's not submitted for audit purposes. What we did differently as the Auditor General's Office, we were of the view we cannot tolerate the non-submission of financial statements by institution, as this forms a very integral part of the accountability ecosystem, that financial statements needs to be submitted, it needs to be audited, needs to be reported, and ultimately the municipality is able then to report in their annual report to the citizens of what they promised them to deliver and what they've done. So if that part of it doesn't happen, then the accountability does not happen in the system. So what we did differently, we actually issued material irregularities for the current year for all of those auditees where the financial statements was outstanding. And when we were looking at it, we said this actually causes harm to the institution because of these financial statements not submitted. Certain governance processes cannot happen within the institution, and as a result, it ultimately can cause harm to the citizen, because in certain cases, if AFS are not submitted, some funding is withheld back. And as a result, it ultimately then impacts the service delivery of the citizen. So clearly a zero tolerance in that regard. We've got about 25 of our auditees in the disclaimed category, and I'll speak about those auditees a bit more at the next few slides, where I'll unpack basically some of the things that we've uncovered when we actually have delved a bit deeper, because this is actually when we're given a disclaimer of opinion, it's the worst opinion that an auditor could give, where the auditor is literally saying, I'm distancing myself from this. I cannot give you any assurance, so I'm distancing myself and giving you, I cannot rely on the information. In majority of the cases, because there is no documentation available, but I'll delve a bit deeper later. When it comes to the adverse opinion, this is basically where there is, in terms of how the financial statements has been prepared and how we've audited, we found material differences that was pervasive in terms of how the policies were set up, how the numbers was then ultimately formulated in those financial statements. And that is in the cases where we've got adverse opinions. So if, for example, one of the key policies of a municipality is about how they do when it comes to the impairment of their receivables, and when we actually audited, these things doesn't correlate with each other. Then we've got quite a number of municipalities still in the qualified zone, and majority of those relates to where there's limitations of documents not being available. But at least the difference between that and the disclaimers is that at least we can isolate it for specific account balances where we have those challenges. And then we also see about 100 of our municipalities having unqualified audit opinions, but still having findings in the area of predetermined objectives or in the area of compliance laws and regulations that we still find a lot of them. So I think ultimately when we're looking at these outcomes, it's basically indicating there is not much improvement compared when we started in 16-17 to where we ended off in 2021. If I can then go over then to the next few slides. And the next few slides, I'm going to deal with it at a very high level, as it deals specifically with the audit outcomes at various provinces at the provincial level and what is sitting in there. So overall, looking at the Eastern Cape, which has about 4 clean audits. And in this case, also, we've seen a regression from when they started with the administration to now, in terms of the audit outcomes. And what we've also noted here in the Eastern Cape, a number of disclaimer municipalities, and they've got about 154 million that they spend on consultants to get them into a state where some of the auditees have unqualified audit opinions. So quite heavily reliant on consultants. Then the irregular expenditure is also quite high, sitting at about 3.1 billion. If we go to the Free State, we see quite sad that there isn't even one clean audit in this province, and they've got the majority of non-submission and still late submission compared to the rest of the country. So what we are calling really for here is urgent action to strengthen the control environment. And key for us in this specific province, we see no improvement in the audit outcomes and a slight regression over the administration period. Also, a province that has spent quite considerable amount of money over the term on consultants, about 254 million, without getting the intended impact in terms of when looking at the audit outcomes. And when I will be talking about some of these examples at a later stage, when we'll be touching on the disclaimer of the municipalities of some of the things that we've uncovered. When we specifically look at how things, so they've got 2 clean audits, and they have the only metro within the whole country actually that is clean, Ekurhuleni, that received a clean audit, and then also the other auditee is Midvaal. So in majority of the cases in Gauteng, they've got quite a number of unqualified audits with finding, and also noting they have no disclaimer audits within this province. When we go over to the next slide, which is KwaZulu-Natal, and here we don't see much improvement in terms over the administration. And also still, yes, a number of auditors sitting in the unqualified zone, but this is also a problem where quite a big bulk of the irregular expenditure is in this problem, where there's non-compliance with prescripts and regulations. And also in the area of predetermined objective, quite a bit of finding. Then we've got about 3 of them that is repeat disclaimers. The next one is Limpopo, and I must indicate we've seen an improvement in this specific province over since the last administration, and mainly because of they were one of this province that had mostly either auditees in the disclaimed zone or in adverse zone or qualified zone, and they in a way managed to turn around the situation within the province, and mainly because of strong leadership tone that was set on the top. There were specific interventions that was run at the various municipality with their provincial treasuries, with their COCTAs, to deal with some of the challenges within local government, and also making use of consultants. So the only thing that we wanted to cautious on to say, because of this heavy reliance on consultant, the sustainability then to sustain the audit outcomes might be a challenge, but they have done considerable amount of work over the period. The other province is Mpumalanga, that we also see not any improvement in terms of the audit outcomes. Still quite a number of provinces sitting then in a municipality sitting in the disclaimed zone, and also in the unqualified zone. And key challenges there is in the enforcement of consequence management that doesn't occur as expected. Then the last 3 provinces that I will touch on is the Northern Cape. And with the Northern Cape, we've seen a slight improvement in the audit outcomes, and with specific attention, they've got a drive of Operation Clean Audit within the province, and they've managed to get 4 out of the 5 districts actually in the clean audit outcome zone. And one of the municipalities, Hantam, also obtaining a clean audit that basically gives the indication that it is possible, it is doable. And important also to note, they've got 1 auditee still that did not submit a financial statement, which is Pokwani, but they are moving in the right direction, although there's still a lot of work that needs to happen to change all the outcomes further. And what we're calling to action is to say, make sure that the basics is in place, because in most of the cases we see, because of appropriate records not in place, it results in us then giving the qualifications or the disclaimer of audit opinion. If we go to the Northwest, and we will notice this is the province with the highest disclaimer of municipality, and this has been over the number of years that we've seen very few improvement across some of these municipality within the Northwest. So they have the dominance of the disclaimer of municipality. So our call to action, they need to continue drive the action on the preventative controls. But as I will unpack the disclaimers, I will zoom into a bit more on that. Then lastly, the Western Cape, and we once again see this is the province with the most clean audit outcomes. It sustained the clean audit outcomes over the administration with 22 clean audit outcomes. But there's also a couple of municipalities in the yellow zone. And that is mainly because of the area of compliance to laws and regulation where procurement prescripts are not followed. And then we find 3 of our municipalities in the qualified zone, and mainly in the Central Karoo district, those municipalities, and then 1 municipality in the Garden Route district. And those are the municipalities that requires the attention to change the outcomes, and will require intervention from both local government and then from the provincial treasury to assist them in that regard. So that's in a nutshell, just a high level of just giving you a picture of the audit outcomes. So the next slide I'm going to spend a bit of time on, which is our disclaimed audit. So this map basically indicates from the prior year to the current year, which of our auditees has been disclaimed. And as I've indicated previously, that disclaimed opinion is one of the worst opinion that we get. Furthermore, we've noticed that for the current year, both Gauteng and Western Cape has no disclaimed audit opinions. So when we look at the specific map, we noted that the color red basically indicates there's repeat disclaimers. Then we've also got some new disclaimers. We've also got auditees that moved out of the disclaimer zone, and then auditees that's been outstanding. And in majority of those cases, when we have late submissions of auditees outstanding, majority of the cases, they are the disclaimed municipalities. Now, important to note for these disclaimer municipalities, as you will recall last year, we started reporting on these disclaimer municipalities and some of the insights that we've gathered in the prior year. And what we then did, also we said much more attention needs to be given to the disclaimer of municipalities, because ultimately money has been given to these municipalities to utilize. However, as auditors, when we go there, we cannot confirm what exactly happened with the money. And as a result, we cannot then give assurance to the citizens out there of exactly what happened with the funds that was given to these municipalities. What we then further went to do last year, as you would notice, that we said for this disclaimer of repeat disclaimers, let's use our powers as AGSA and let's issue material irregularities, especially in the case where there was repeat disclaimers, because this is causing harm to the citizens of that town and to the institution. So we started the process to issue these material irregularities at the various disclaimer municipalities in the prior year. And I think important to note also what we were very resolute about, to make sure that in these instances that is also followed through in terms of the commitments that is put on the table. And if those commitments are not adhered to, we're basically going the next steps as part of the process. And later on, when I will be dealing with the other slides, I will be delving in a bit deeper about what were some of the next steps that we actually started looking at. I think one of the good stories that I wanted to share with some of these disclaimer municipalities, and especially those that came out of the disclaimer. And we see in total there's about 9 that came out of the disclaimer, which basically gives the indication that it is possible to come out of the disclaimer, because these municipalities all indicated in green are those ones actually in the various provinces, in the Northwest, in the Western Cape, in Mpumalanga and KZN and Eastern Cape, where they've put specific effort in and basically heed to the call of action to change the audit outcome. Furthermore, what we basically also did for these disclaimer municipalities, because we said when we actually go out to the citizens next time, we must have deeper insights of what is happening at these disclaimer municipalities. And we've actually selected 10 municipalities across and where we basically did deeper work at these municipalities. So we selected about 4 municipalities in the Northwest, 2 in the Northern Cape, 3 in the Free State, and then 1 municipality at Mpumalanga for the year under review. And I think what's important for us is to say, from an accountability perspective, when it comes to stewardships, accountability and transparency, and deliberately that we see citizens not getting service on the ground when it comes to these municipalities, that's this claim, and the type of service citizens get on the ground. So what are some of these insights that we gathered when we were looking at some of the municipalities? So important to note, the first work that we started to do, we said, let's actually go to the bank accounts of these municipalities, these 10 municipalities that I've mentioned now. And let's see, when we actually go to the bank details, what is sitting there? Can we actually trace if they've indicated they've made a payment to a supplier? Can we actually confirm that it had happened? If salaries was paid to the officials, can we actually trace this information via the bank statement, then back to then supporting information? So when we were looking at these 10 municipalities that were selected, in 6 of those instances, we found there wasn't unique identification in the bank statement. And what it literally means that normally when you would write out a check, you would indicate, I paid ESCOM. And then next to the stamp, it would indicate you've paid ESCOM, and then you'd issue the check. So in this case, what we're talking about, when we were actually trying to identify, we couldn't see who the payments went to. And there wasn't clear identifiers for these payments. And I'll talk a bit about those municipalities. But in the 4 cases which we've analyzed, and we've listed these 4 municipality, Coambeka, Likwa, Jaumaralong, Madibeng, where we basically had the data and we have the information, we could actually see that 1.4 billion went for payroll, for salaries and wages. 1.9 billion went for a bulk purchase, which is services to ESCOM, to the water boards, and that is what we could confirm. Then we could also confirm about 1 billion went for statutory and other payments like to SARS. So those are the things that we could confirm. And about 1.7 billion went to service providers. So important to note now, with this information, what municipalities can then do, they can then now go back to say, if I paid supplier X, can I actually confirm that the service has been delivered as indicated for the supplier that I've paid for goods and services? So it gives us then that information to utilize, and the municipalities then can utilize. And this is the information that we did share with the municipalities. Important to note, for those 6 municipalities, we then referred some of them to the FIC to assist us then to go then in terms of much deeper to see if they can give us this unique identifier. So based on that, the FIC did come back to us in some of the instances for those municipalities. And currently, we are looking at that data and analyzing the data so that we are able then to analyze for what did this money go to and where did it go to. And we will then be doing further work in the specific cycle. At these 10 municipalities, what we've also did, because one of the things that we were very clear about, that in terms of system and processes not in place at these municipalities and not embedded, it has a huge impact on service delivery. And so there was quite a big focus on infrastructure spending at the municipality, and specifically work that we've done for the current year on the wastewater treatment plant. And I do think it was quite revealing what the results showed us when we were doing work at the wastewater treatment plant. And I think the biggest concern for us, and in this case, actually, we've issued some material irregularities on substantial harm, because in majority of the cases, we found that these wastewater treatment plants were not properly maintained. And as a result of that, spillages happens that causes a health hazard to our citizens and also to the environment in the long run. So in those cases, we've actually issued quite a number of material irregularities of substantial harm to those municipalities to address these issues. I think what this information further showed us when it comes to the maintenance of infrastructure, that first of all, that there wasn't appropriate maintenance plans in place, and then a very small portion of the budget is actually spent on the maintenance of infrastructure. That ultimately then results, if these things are not properly maintained, in the long run, it will cost much, much more for you then to fix up or start or build something new. When we further looked at the infrastructure projects, there was also findings that we found in terms of key delays of current infrastructure projects that was on the that they were busy with. And I think in majority of the cases, we found that these projects were delayed. There was major overspending. So every time when a project delayed, so if for today you pay 10 Rand for something, if you delay it by another month or two, you might pay double that amount because of the delay and not appropriate project management on those projects. And those were some of the concerning findings that we raised when we were looking at this work. Then also when we were looking at consultants and how they were appointed, so in a lot of cases, some of these disclaimer municipalities appoint consultants to come assist them with record keeping. We found that they appointed these consultants, but they weren't clear on what they were supposed to deliver, as no proper need analysis that was done. Then we also did some follow-ups in those instances where we've issued those material irregularities for the disclaimed municipalities, and we're continuously following up on these substantial harm MIs that we've issued. The only one that we've indicated where we believe some action has been taken was the case for the period under review. But that is the work on the disclaimed municipalities that I thought important to share in terms of some of these insights that came out of these disclaimed municipalities. And I think it clearly indicates that if your environment is not conducive and you don't have proper processes, system in place, and you're not able to report back to the citizens, it ultimately impacts the service delivery for those citizens on the ground and the type of services that the citizens on the ground need. If I can move to the next slide, and what we wanted to demonstrate here, and as I've indicated earlier when I was actually speaking about the outcomes and said, remember that number 114 that I've mentioned earlier relating to there's 41 clean and 100 that has unqualified audit opinions, which comes to the 141. If you look at this specific slide, I think this is also more shocking that if, for example, as auditors, we would have accepted the financial statement as is and not allow for material adjustment, we would have been in a position where only 62 municipalities would have received unqualified audit opinions compared to the 151. So once again, we see quite a bit of the audit effort that goes in when it comes to these financial statements that's submitted for audit purpose. I think important what we wanted to demonstrate in the slide that when it comes to officials that's appointed at the municipality to do their job, to do their roles and responsibility at the municipalities, those officials are there. Secondly, there's also consultants that's been utilized to assist in a lot of times to prepare these financial statements. And there's also various interventions from national and provincial. So when we look at all of this that goes into spending to basically make sure that the set of financial statement is submitted, we still find ourselves in a position that we find poor quality of financial statements that is submitted in majority of the cases where consultants are then being utilized. And as a result of this, it impacts then in terms of the credibility of the information, it increases the audit fees ultimately. And from a consulting perspective, there's no transfer of skills. And in some instances, we've also indicated where consultants was ineffective, which ultimately then results in loss to the institution. And knowing that these institutions are quite strapped in terms of cash. So when I go to the financial health slide, which is the next slide, it's the municipalities from a local government perspective that based on the economic circumstances that we're living under, cash is not freely available. There's huge unemployment. And as a result, every rand and cents that you have to your disposal, you must make sure that you effectively spend every rand and cents that you've got to your disposal. So what we want to demonstrate here, all the effort that then ultimately goes into to get a set of credible financial statements, it's still quite dependent for the audit process to pick up on a lot of these misstatements for the year under review. I've touched a bit on the next slide, which basically deals with the financial health situation. And I think overall, looking at the financial health situation, we've got quite a number of municipalities where we say we've got doubt that you're able to continue, because when we actually look at your income versus your expenditure, either you've got a net deficit for the year, or your liabilities exceeds your assets. You've got more people that you owe than what you can actually pay for. And so when we look at this financial vulnerable position that a lot of our municipalities are in. So it all starts with the budgeting process, that we say when it comes to the budgeting process and the discipline that's installed from a budgeting perspective, and we find that a lot of times municipalities over budget the revenue part of it. And as a result of that, the collections don't come in. Ultimately, that results then in this losses that they are occurring. And you can see across all provinces, we've got quite a bit of challenges where we're saying that there's doubt that you will be able to continue because of all the creditors or all the people that you owe money for the year under review. So this is definitely something that must get attention across a number of municipalities within the various provinces. The next slide that I want to spend maybe a minute or two on deals with the performance information. And what we have noticed over the years that we are auditing, this is a section basically that does not get quite a bit of attention over the number of years, because as the AGSA, we would normally only report findings in your management report about if it's qualified, unqualified, or disclaimed. But in your audit report, it will just be material findings that we would bring to the table. And we do believe as part of service delivery, this part is critically important because it speaks to what you will be delivering, the municipalities will be delivering to citizens. So if we can maybe just take it a step back. So it started with the IDP process, where it's a consultative process where the municipalities goes to the communities and basically get inputs to say, what are some of the things that you want us to deliver on? And based on that, a budget is formulated, based on that targets and indicators is formulated, and they call it the service delivery budget implementation plan. And then on a quarterly basis, the municipality report, based on what we've set ourselves out to do, this is what we've delivered. And then the final year-end reporting comes. So what were some of the things that we uncovered as we were auditing this performance information? So yes, in 46% of the cases, we find that municipalities had credible and reliable performance information. But important to note, when we were looking at this information, we noticed that the needs analysis in a lot of cases of the communities are not taken into account. So some cases where they attend these public meetings and they raise concerns, those things are not then adopted as part of the IDP process or the SDBIP process. I think important to note also, when we speak about the needs, so for example, a municipality would indicate, I will provide 20 people access to pipe water. But we know in terms of the needs of the community, there's 500 households that need access to pipe water. But when it comes to including the indicator, it would only be linked into the budget. So it doesn't then address the total need of the community. So these are some of the things that we've uncovered. Furthermore, when we've looked at some of the findings, first of all, under the usefulness of the information, where we say, when we're looking at some of your targets and indicators, we cannot confirm if this is in the SMART principle. If it's specific, if it's measurable, it's attainable, it's realistic, it's time-bound. As auditors, based on the target and indicator that you've got there, we cannot confirm. how you will measure this indicator. The second challenge that we found when we now try to audit the information and verifying to actual audit evidence. So for example, if it was indicated that I will deliver 10 sites, 5 water sites to 10 households. So when we wanted now to confirm this evidence on the ground, we couldn't confirm the information, and hence we have findings then on reliability. So what is the crux then of the message? The crux of the message, if municipalities is then unable to, first of all, plan appropriately, secondly, monitor what they've planned themselves out to do, and thirdly, report on it, how much more does the service delivery then not happen on the ground as it's supposed to? And I think that was one of the major things that we have uncovered in terms of those municipalities, even in the disclaimer, quite a number of them where we said, we cannot actually confirm anything that you've done when it comes to service delivery. It's quite concerning. And here we're speaking about the bread and butter issues to the citizens on the ground, having access to basic service, having access to water, having access to sanitation. And those are some of the basic things that citizens must get access to. So these are some of very good observations and insights that we've picked up during the process. I think important also to note when we were looking, we had quite a bit of focus on the metro municipalities where we looked at the public participation process. We looked at the implementation of Circular 88 and how they went about implementing. And there was quite a bit of challenges that we've picked up during this processes when it came to the public participation process, where not always these needs were taken into account, and also certain challenges that these metros have when it comes to Circular 88. And I think what we did find when it comes to the metros and the secondary cities that actually had quite a large chunk of the budget overall from a local government perspective, majority was sitting with qualified and disclaimer of audit opinion, which is a concerning. If I can then move over to the next slide, and I've touched a bit on this, on our material irregularities, our extended powers. And as we started with this process, where we started phasing auditors from 2018 to 2019, and over every year we've basically phased in more auditors. So to date, actually, we've identified 185 material irregularities. One of the key things, and I think what was important for us when we went on updating the legislation for these, and it came back to that accountability does not happen in the system. And hence we were asking ourselves, what is it differently as the AG we can do when it comes to this? And as a result of this process then came into being. What we can indicate in some instances where we do raise these material irregularities, we do see some call to action. We do see some accounting officers taking action, either by stopping the contract, by preventing certain losses, by making sure that those things doesn't occur. And also in some instances, there's consequence management that occurs. But we don't see the intended impact that we would like to see. So still to few, much more to be done when it comes in this area of the identification of material irregularities. Important to note that what we've indicated that in terms of the process when we've identified this material irregularity and we satisfied that the accounting office is taking appropriate action, we would then end off there with that material irregularity. But when we see for that MI, but the action is not taken, then we would go to the next phase of recommendation phase. So there's a couple of those ones where we actually went into those phase of the recommendation phase, which is basically on the next slide. That is a depiction basically where we basically have issued MIs, if we can move to the next slide. And in certain cases, we found that MIs were resolved in 6 cases, and there's quite a number of them where we indicated that the accounting officer is taking appropriate action based on what they've committed to do, either by doing an investigation and making sure after the investigation is done that the actual accountability happens as part of the accountability chain. Important to note, there was 26% of the instances where when we assessed this information, we felt it was not appropriate action. And as a result of that, we basically included in the audit report some recommendations. And important to note, so we've listed the auditees there where we've actually issued recommendations in the audit report to say, we give you another period to implement these actions. And if these actions are not implemented, then it can go into the next phase of this material irregularity process, which is the remedial action issued that can then result in the certificate of debt in those instances where there's a financial loss that has been incurred for the review. So this is a process that we are taking quite serious in terms of the material irregularities, and there's rigorous follow-up to make sure that the consequence management part to happen. And so it's something that we are monitoring very, very closely. Then important to note, if we can maybe just go to the next slide in terms of our call to action that I wanted maybe just to talk about, our call to action for all the key role players. Maybe the next slide, please, Gavin. So first of all, we say, what are some of our call to action to make sure we've got capable leadership that demonstrates change to strengthening transparency and accountability? So important to know, we speak about the credible financial and performance information. So that is critically important. And I think the key thing from the municipality side, there's section 71 and 72 reports that goes to the table on a monthly basis. How do you call then, how do you make sure that this information, where you make very important decisions on a credible information that comes to your table? And here your internal audit unit has an important oversight role that they can play in this regard. The second one, we've a call to action in terms of stabilizing and capacitating the administration, because we do believe if there's appropriate skills and resources in place, this will ultimately have an impact then in changing the audit outcome and changing the culture with municipalities. Then the third one is in terms of the culture of financial management. And this includes in terms of the collection of the revenues, the how you're spending your money on what you are spending, making sure that you appropriately account for these things and preventing any loss and recovering any financial losses and wastage very speedily, and making sure, lastly, making sure leading by example, and when there is transgressions, there is appropriate consequence management for those transgressions that has been experienced. And that is key in terms of some of the calls to action. So we do believe if these things are then acted upon and leadership bring those changes, we will basically get a change in the culture in the public sector. We will be able then to see a change in these audit outcomes and ultimately impacting the life of citizens on the ground when it comes to service delivery. But that is in a nutshell the presentation I wanted to bring to the table. I'm also gonna, Pandile, okay, if I can maybe just go to see if there was any specific questions that was asked, and maybe at the same time I can then respond to these questions that was asked from the members. But over to you first, Pandile, then you can give me the go ahead to do so. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. It's very, very engaging, and it's, for me, it gave us a bigger overview of what's happening in the local government. We noted that there is some improvement in some areas, but there is still areas where they are struggling, noting that we only have 41 clean audits in the in all these municipalities. But even with those clean audits, service deliveries can still be questioned. So there's concerns around whether they are really doing service delivery for those areas as well. So maybe to start off with, my question will be, how do we balance that, the issue of service delivery versus clean audits? Because they are doing their best in their accounting, but service delivery is not experienced by our citizens, and citizens are not concerned about clean audits. They want the services to make their lives easier. Maybe take that one. And then the questions that we have, or we want to encourage the participants in this platform to please write their questions in the Q&A so that they can be addressed. So the second question that I have, that was posed by Karen France, which says, what was the impact of the MIs issued to those municipalities who did not submit the AFS? Okay. The third question is, what is the intervention, is from Izzy Malachi, says, what is the interventions that has been put in place for these non-performing municipalities in order to improve the audit outcomes in the next financial year? Let's just take those for now, then we'll go to the next one. I'm noting there's anyone as well there.
Perfect. Thank you so much for those questions, Pendele. If I can maybe go to the first one, the one on the clean audit versus service delivery. And I think important to note the point that I've made when I started to speak about clean audit and what it basically means. It means basically you've got systems and processes in place that is credible in order then for you to respond with these challenges. I think I was very clear to indicate that the fact that the audit is clean, it doesn't mean that service delivery happens on the ground. But what we do believe that a clean audit is the basis for service delivery. And I think over the number of years, we've seen in instances where an audit is clean and they've got some of these challenges of service delivery on the ground, they're able to respond much more quicker because they've got the system and processes in place. So the notion is, yes, 100% a clean audit doesn't give you service delivery, but yes, when you have a clean audit, you're able then to respond better to some of your challenges of service delivery on the ground. And I think important to note, when we were specifically looking and we were analyzing the information when it came to the service delivery, because we focused on some clean audits and also looked at when it came to the service delivery part. And some of the things that we've actually uncovered when we were doing some of this work and some of this clean audits, first of all, in a lot of cases, yes, they were aware of what the needs of the community was, however, it wasn't included. So already the awareness is there to say, what is it then that we need to do differently, that we're able then to provide the service to our citizens as they will require these services from us. And I think important to note also, in terms of the public participation part and the engagement part is critically important, because a lot of times we find that where some of this junction happen is that appropriate communication does not always happen between the municipalities and then to the citizens on the ground of what can and what cannot be done for the citizens on the ground. But we do believe that to have a clean audit is a good basis then for service delivery, because by having a clean audit, you're ultimately able then to respond much faster, much quicker in instances where you don't have proper systems in place. You won't be able then to respond much quicker. So that was on that question. The second one on these municipalities where we've issued these material irregularities. So what I can indicate, in about 50% of the cases that we've issued these material irregularities, we've received those financial statements subsequently. There is a few where we have not received those financial statements. Some commitments has been given. However, we're now following the route where the next step, as part of the material irregularity process, we will then do recommendations. So before we actually came to this point where we've issued these material irregularities for these outstanding financial statements, we wrote numerous letters to the legislatures, to their local caucus, to the provincial treasury, to council, to indicate that we did not receive these financial statements. And this is something that we are monitoring closely, but I can indicate in about 50% of the cases, we did subsequently then receive those financial statements. The next question, I think I must just get again, and it had to do with, maybe if you can maybe just repeat that one, Pandile. Oh, sorry, I've got it now. What happens to the non-performing municipalities? Nah? And I think that is the one on the disclaimer that I've touched on. So what we are basically doing at this point in time, so as we've shared these outcomes with the local caucus, with the provincial treasuries, within the various provinces, they've also got some distinct role and responsibility in terms of their oversight. So what we've seen thus far in some of the instances, the caucus and provincial treasury, they are collaborating together to see how they can support better these municipalities that is disclaimed, because I do believe they would play a very critical role in providing the support to these municipalities. And what we will then do differently also this year, as I've indicated, we've only focused on 10 municipalities that was disclaimed. So for the current year, we're actually extending that to do a bit more municipalities to see work that we've done on the bank accounts and also in terms of the infrastructure and the other work, and to bring those things also to the fore. But I know there has been quite intense conversations and discussion also on provincial level, and basically getting some commitments to say this is how we're looking to support these disclaimed municipalities in our area.
Okay, we've got additional questions. The one from Rini says, what has been the role of audit committees in those municipalities? Do they have the impact, and has their role been noted in improvements or failure to bring improvements? Then the second one is from Sevan Pata, says, like the tender defaulters register at National Treasury, the AG website should have a register of all letters of credit issued and the progress thereon. So that's more of a comment than a question. Then the next question is, what kind of disclaimer audit opinions do secondary cities and metros obtain from the Auditor General? Let's just take those for now.
Thank you, Pandile. So if I can maybe talk to the role of the audit committee first, in terms of them being part of the oversight responsibility, and what role do they play. And one of the slides that I presented, where I was speaking about the financial statements and the intended impact of all of these key role plays there. We've got the finance unit, we've got consultants in there, we've got also provincial treasury, COCTA, national treasury playing a role. And then part of that slide also we spoke about there's oversight that happens with internal audit and audit committee, where these financial statements are submitted for audit purposes. And clearly, I think from that perspective, it's things that we normally raise in terms of the effectiveness of oversight if those challenges are there. And important to note, when we came to some of the disclaimer municipalities, I recall in the Free State, we visited some of these municipalities, and we also had some engagements with the audit committees. And I think in some of those instances, in terms of the oversight role, if we go back to the section, they've got specific roles and responsibility to play. So in some of these cases, these things are raised and brought to the attention of leadership and ultimately reported to the council that has a specific role and responsibility, because the audit committee would be a subcommittee of council. But in certain cases, these things are then raised, but then nothing is then done. And similar, we find the same thing over and over again. In some of the instances where the audit committee is then not effective, we would also then raise some of those findings in the management report, and also have regular conversations with them in this regard. But clearly we see even this review of the financial statements, that is one of the key responsibility, that still that review happens and we still find errors. So that is maybe something that we maybe need to have more conversation about, to see, okay, what are the other levers that we can pull in terms of the oversight role that audit committee has to play, and what can they do in terms of their mandate. So I think that is a definitely a good question. When it comes to the one on the disclaimers for the metros and the secondary cities, we can maybe just come back to in terms of our analysis of the information, but also in our general report, there's quite good annexures attached to the general report where we would go per auditee in quite detail of what are the findings that we've uncovered. Now, particularly, I think when we were looking at specifically, if I can recall now, with the information on the metro, especially on service delivery part of it, we found quite a number of our metros being disclaimed in the management report when it came to service delivery. And I think one of the concerns that we had then when we were actually looking at this information, we were saying some of those sitting then with the biggest budgets, taking into account the metros, that is disclaimed when it comes to service delivery, where majority of our citizens are staying in some of the cities where they can't confirm if they've delivered these services then to those citizens then on the ground ultimately, which is then quite concerning. But what we can indicate as part of our general report, there is quite detailed analysis per auditee and what are the type of findings that is included in there. And then I think in a week's time also, as soon as our interactive website will become live, then you can actually drill down per auditee, per province, and actually see more detailed finding per auditee. So it's quite a good analysis even that will be available. But in the general report currently, that detail is also then depicted for our municipalities across all the provinces with much more insight in terms of the type of findings that's included in there. Back to you, Pandile.
Okay, thank you for those. I will take another 3 again. So the one from Matthews Malimatsa says, what are other qualification areas except the material irregularity for non-compliance? And the one from Motlokwa Mekwa says, what exactly is the problem? Is it lack of appropriate qualified people? Is it attitude? Is it politics? Unless we know where the problem emanates, we will not deal with these issues. And that's okay. Then let me go to the next one. Sorry, just okay. From Rachel Kuna, one of the biggest challenge in the environment is the lack of consequence management that does not take effect when there were transgressions or non-compliance to process. How do we enforce consequence management? Thank you.
Thank you, Pandile, for those questions. If I can maybe go ahead. So if we can, the first one dealt with the qualification areas and what were those areas of qualification. So in majority of the cases, if we look across the board, what are some of these items that led to a qualified audit opinion, mainly around revenue management, which basically comes back about the systems and processes in place to basically record revenue and billing people that's supposed to be billed. So that is a key thing that led to qualify. The other big ticket item that we find is on asset management. And I think for me, this one is even concerning because money is being spent to say construct assets or to purchase assets, but then it doesn't appear then that auditors are able then to confirm these assets. No? And that is also a big area of qualification, and mainly due to the infrastructure assets not being appropriately recorded. Then we've also got some qualifications areas in the area of receivables, how the receivables are recorded, of course, if the revenue is an issue, and also on payables where there is no proper reconciliations that's done And as a result of that, some of those qualifications. So that's just in a nutshell, some are in terms of the highlights. But one of the biggest one that we do find across all municipalities that's either qualified, disclaim, is in the area of revenue management and asset management, which is quite a big. And you would note, if you go to a position, a performance statement of a municipality, the biggest part of the performance statement would consist basically the property, plant, and equipment. And that is the area, either assets that's basically be constructed, the amount that is sitting in work in progress, where the asset registers does not tie up to the supporting information and the underlying information. So those are some of the challenges, if I can maybe highlight some of the qualification areas, and in some instances also where there's no completeness of what they've disclosed as irregular expenditure, we would also qualify in those instances. The next one is an interesting question in terms of what exactly is the problem, or what is at the root of the problem. And I think when we were trying to look at the call to action to say, if we look overall at the local government or the outcomes, we basically can summarize to say, what is it next that needs to be done in terms of our call to action. But key to say, if we talk about what is the problem, and I think I'm reminded of the slide that I started with in terms of the accountability ecosystem and all the key role plays in the accountability ecosystem. And if each and every key role player does not play their role, then you get the situation that things doesn't happen as they are supposed to happen. And I think for me, for example, if you take a municipality that is disclaimed, one of the key things is the reason why they disclaim, because there's no record in place. So what is at the root of the problem? That number one, there's no record keeping process may be appropriately in place because they're not maintaining basic records in place. Secondly, it could be an issue that staff is they're not skilled to have to keep the record, or it could be that leadership is not setting the tone at the top. Now, for me, at the heart of all of this, what is that if leadership sets the appropriate tone at the top, it filters down into the rest of the organization. And I think that is key. We've seen distinct changes happen at municipalities where they change their audit outcome. I've given some examples where municipalities move from disclaim to a qualified opinion. And that we've only seen because the tone that was set at the top by leadership. And if leadership set the right tone at the top, it permeates, it impacts the culture, it impacts the behavior. If leadership shows there's a zero tolerance for fraud and corruption, it will permeate through the rest of the organization. And that's what we've seen over the years. If leadership sets the appropriate tone at the top, there's that will and the desire to want to change. You've seen the intended impact. I've been myself more than about 20 years in local government, and I've seen where that tone is set at the top, and leadership takes that account. We want to change, and we will drive the whole institution into that you do see that change that basically happens. The next question is about the consequence management part of it, and you're 100% right in terms of we report year on year, for example, on unauthorized, fruitless, and wasteful expenditure in terms of the quantum of the amount. When we actually go back, we find that there's no consequence management happening. The same thing then happens on a year-to-year basis. And hence, we started having this amended powers where we said, in instances where there's a loss to the fiscus, and we uncovered and we pick it up, there's a loss to the fiscus. In those instances, we will then make sure we use our extended powers, we report it to the leadership, they need to take action. If they don't take the action, it will result in a recommendation. If that recommendation is not implemented, it will result in remedial action, which ultimately can result in a certificate of debt issued in the name of the accounting officer. What we do find, because of the process and the fairness of the process, it does take a bit of time, but I do believe we will get closer to that in cases where those actions are not taken, a consequence managed. But the key role plays, each role player in the accountability ecosystem has to play their part. Thank you.
Okay, yes, the questions, and I'm glad you are able to cope with them. They are coming strong. We have 10 more to go through, but we'll go through them one by one. So Lucas Rapella is saying, great presentation. Have you seen any improvement on audit outcomes on municipalities under administration? Okay, so any improvement on municipalities under administration? Then the second one says, should all appointed municipal managers be sent on a course to be able to draw up the financial statements of the municipality, failing which they should not be entitled to their bonuses? Okay. The last one for this round says, what is it that AG is doing to strike a balance between the need to satisfy audit requirements, which should be drawn from the legislative framework applicable in local government, and the actual provisions in the various local government and other constitutional directives? Issue of reference is the need to comply with the requirements for the adoption of the MFMA Circular 88 indicators and the provision in the legislation that guides the progressive realization of services in section 152 of the Constitution, 152.2 of the Constitution. I think you can take those for now.
Yeah, I'll try to, I hope I understood the last question, what was asked. But maybe the one on the under administration, and notably we've noticed, because we've looked over the administration as we started, how many municipalities has been administration and currently, and it has increased over the period, the number of municipalities being under administration. And I think important to note, when municipalities is under administration, it's not in all instances that you see the desired impact that you want to see in terms of the outcome that change is necessary when a municipality is under administration. As that administration is there to do a specific role in terms of reference that was agreed with the MEC of what they must do. So sometimes for that period of time when the administration is there, you find there is some improvements within that period of time. However, as soon as that process then stops, then everything starts then from over again. So anywhere where there's instability, because what happens at that time when the administrator comes, that system is totally broken already. And then first of all, then the role of the administrators, they now to build up that's broken, plus they're dealing with the day-to-day stuff that happens here. And in a lot of those cases, we don't really see major improvement in the audit outcomes as such, if the question is around that. And I think some of the challenge that we did raise is maybe the length of time. Sometimes that the administrator's appointment is for a short period of time, so it doesn't then allow enough time then to implement all the corrective actions or measures within that short space of time or short period of time that we find in based on our experience. In some instances, I've also seen where the administrator has been there and things has been turned around. Yeah, so depending most probably on the severity of what is really broken and what needs to be fixed, and in terms of that instability that it causes at the institution. The second one on the appointment of the MMs, if they must do the financial statement. So there is, as I've indicated when I was speaking about the accountability ecosystem and the various role players as part of the system, which is the official, senior managers, and part of that senior managers would be your CFO. So that's, if you go back to the legislation, they've got a key role and responsibility in terms of that set of financial statements, in terms of the preparation, and ultimately the municipal manager then oversees this process that needs to happen. So yeah, so in that instances, the CFOs, I do believe, has a critical role to play when it comes to preparing accurate and complete financial statements. Because in terms of when we look at when a CFO is appointed at the institution, they've got specific financial qualifications to be able to do this work. So they should be the experts on that. And from the municipal manager side, they oversee this process, making sure that there is credible information that is presented, and there's system and processes in place for that. So definitely, I think in terms of creating this understanding and the training, it's important, but I do believe ultimately the CFO, they've also got this responsibility in terms of the preparation of financial statements. And what we do find a lot of times at the municipality in terms of looking at the various structures in terms of the finance unit, there's a lot of time in a lot of cases that because of this frequent reconciliation process is not done, and a lot of these things are done then left for the year end, then a lot of municipalities find themselves into trouble because the daily and monthly processes are not done. And then the year-end process is only utilized. And then in cases they appoint consultants to do everything in a short period of time. And that is where a lot of errors and mistakes then ultimately happen because of daily and monthly processes not being adhered to as it's supposed to adhere to. The last question, I think, Mandile, if I maybe can attempt it, and I think it was more about to say, we've got all these laws in legislation, how do we strike a balance if I got the person correctly, that the municipalities have to comply with. And I think important to note from our side, we've got a responsibility to audit and report. And when we actually look at it, and it's indicated in our directive in terms of what are some of the focus areas that we do focus on a yearly basis, and are we changing these focus area that is depicted in our directive. So over the last number of years, we have used this very consistently and not really deviated from some of the compliance areas that we looked at. What we tried to do with Circular 88, so we were not at all punitive to the metros when we were reporting these findings, but more a base to say, we know this is work in progress. We know this is something that has been started. So all we wanted to say, what is some of the value based on our observations and things that we've picked up that we can share with you that will assist you then going forward. And I think what was in the background of that when we were looking at the implementation of Circular 88 and what was the challenges that we wanted to report on it from a value-adding perspective. I hope I've responded, Pandile. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We've got the next set of questions. Gabriel Klaas says, why is the cost of the AG office so expensive? We can identify. Can the AG give incentives to municipalities that have made the AG life easier by reducing cost? This is from Councillor Archie Klaas of Overberg District Municipality. But he also adds, I must acknowledge the outstanding support we have had from the AG office. The AG has truly helped to further develop the municipality capacity. Thank you very much. Then the next question says, from Lizette van der Merwe, if consultants have no clear indicators on what needs to be done, should the appointment of consultant not be regulated by the national or provincial treasuries? Okay. Then the next one, this is from Dikhatso Mashaba, what has been the most common repeat findings that across all municipalities that lead to qualification, reasons thereof, and what are the practical implementable solutions? Let's take those three.
Thank you, Pandile. So if I can start with the first one about the cost of the AG, I was, as that question was raised, to say, is the incentive? So there is a reduced fee, if everything is in place, that is the incentive. No, but what I wanted to say in terms of the cost of the AG, and I think from our perspective, we've got a clearly defined budget indicating what we will be working on and where we will be spending our time on. And I always encourage the auditees, as part of our steering committee meetings, we normally regularly meet with our auditees and would normally present this information on a 2-weekly basis or so. And I mean, as they do have the descriptive to interrogate and ask the questions, nothing stops us to ask those questions where we feel it's excessive, or we need better understanding of what exactly it's done. So if I can maybe just demonstrate something small now, because I've been the auditor on the other side, that, for example, we've got to audit a transaction on procurement and contract management, making an example. So from an audit perspective, as an auditor, if you've selected that transaction, you need to go back to the source. So if that payment relates to a tender that was advertised, you now have to go back to that tender that was advertised. And if there's 50 respondents to the tender, you have to go through each and every document of those 50 respondents and see, in the first place, that they do the criteria correct. Was it advertised correctly? Was the criteria? But you have to go through each tender file as such of everybody that applied. So there's quite a lot of information then as auditors you have to go through to be able to get appropriate and sufficient audit evidence. So appropriate thinking about the right evidence, sufficient talking about enough evidence that you have to gather. So you can't just say, having conversations with people and say, I can conclude on my audit. Unfortunately, as auditors, there's certain principles that you've got to comply with in terms of the standards, and for you to be able to draw your audit conclusion and audit opinion. So it's in basis of that background that the fees and the cost then is then put together. But I mean, I encourage, if you speak to those senior managers on the ground and see where efficiency can be gained. So I've also seen in past where if audit files are prepared, there's efficiency gains and it has an impact on the cost. So there is definitely things in the control of those auditors that they can do to save some costs. The next one is in terms of the issue on the consultants, and where we are about the process of appointment of consultants. So one of the things that we've really looking at further to say, when these consultants is appointed, what process is being followed. And I can indicate from a National Treasury perspective, there is guidance that's issued. It's called in terms of the cost containment guidance when you appoint consultants. So they say very clearly, when you go and appoint these consultants, make first of sure you've done a need analysis to say, you're needing the service for X, Y, and Z. So, and it's very clear, regulated in that cost containment guide. So there is information available that municipalities can use before they go about consult. But what we do find that this information is totally ignored and not then being utilized in the appointment of consultants, because it's quite detailed, it's quite specific. And I think those are one of the areas that we've looked into, say, when these municipalities had to appoint these consultants, did they go through the right process? And in some cases, we've actually issued findings to municipalities, and we've also issued a few material irregularities in that regard. So it is a space that we are watching quite closely. Then the last question is in terms of the repeat findings. What are some of those repeat findings? And maybe if I can try and practicalize one, what is a repeat finding in the potential, what could be one of the solutions that we can then basically think of, that I can basically think of specifically when it comes to the area of the financial statement side. So we've got an issue on asset management where we've indicated there's say we cannot basically audit the area in terms of infrastructure asset. What we do know, for example, from a valuation perspective, that on a yearly basis, a valuation role is done. And so where for the entire town, normally that valuator that's an expert writes down and evaluates all the property within the town. But what we find that municipalities have some of this information to their disposal, but then they don't utilize this information then to their disposal to assist them, because that could be a basis then used to update your own asset register or to write up your own asset register. Similar, the GSI system that they use sometimes for the recording of the infrastructure asset, sometimes that information is not used. And similar in the areas of the items when it comes to the revenue side, and they're not billing everybody that's supposed to, the customer list is not complete, that valuation role can also be used as a basis, actually, to make sure everybody that I'm supposed to bill, I'm actually billing in the system. So that is maybe just some of the things that we've seen on a repeat basis, where there is the information is there and can then be utilized. And it's basically saying, we've got this information, but how do we then go about systematically sorting out these things? So I just tried to give maybe a practical example that was responded after. Thank you, Pandile.
Thank you. We'll take the next round. I would like to encourage the participants to please take part in the Mentimeter. The link has been put there. Can you take part so that we can just have your views? Reminder, it's anonymous. No one can see who said what, so you can just give us your views on that one. Then the next question says, from the Kagiso Mashaba again, it says, on AOPO, what is your take on the issue of submitting only the SDBIP scorecard annual performance report on the 31st August instead of submitting the exhaustive narrative report required as per Circular 63? Okay. Okay, then maybe adding the other one she has as well on the AOPO. What is your take on the observations that AGSA may be attempting to assign their audit observation to predetermined set of findings and thus distorting, communicating clearly the observation in a manner that auditees can be capacitated to customize adequate fitting corrective improvement actions? Okay, so that's the two around AOPO. Then the next one is from Michael Westcott, says, following the consequence management provision instituted by the Public Audit Amendment Bill of 2018, have there been any prosecutions indirectly emanating from this act for gross material irregularities that are not reversed as requested by the AG? So let's take those.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Pandile. So what I will also maybe do in my response, maybe as an example, as part of the accountability ecosystem, I'll also maybe share in terms of, because I do believe internal audit has a critical role to play as part of this ecosystem, in terms of support of the municipalities and also the SEM supply chain managers. So I'll just touch a bit on that. So in terms of the AOPO reporting, in terms of Circular 33 and what is supposed to then be submitted, from my perspective, I think important to note, it's most probably something that to be taken up with National Treasury, because the circulars comes in from their side in terms of what are some of the requirements in terms of their own reporting that they require municipalities then to report on. So I would rather not really want to comment on that and relating to that. The second one is in terms of the predetermined objectives and how can we then assist municipalities better when it comes to some corrective action that they need to do now. And I think I will link this actually to the role that the internal audit plays when it comes to this information, the predetermined objective information, because they've got a critical role to play in terms of that is depicted in terms of their own mandate of that they have to review this information. So I think important to note for any municipality that's struggling, that where you basically have findings on performance information on the usefulness, where we've indicated your indicators does not meet the principles, that we cannot measure these indicators. What I would recommend in that instance is, if within your district or within your district, there's actually an auditee that has received no findings in that area, I would actually say, see if you can utilize some of the information, taking into account when it comes to service delivery on local government level is very similar in nature in terms of the services that needs to be delivered. So And what I do find a lot of times, municipalities want to put too much information. So in some cases, you have municipalities with 500 targets and indicators that they're monitoring. And just for any normal person to monitor so many things. So is to say, basically, what is the basic things that we need to provide to our communities? Does it that we do the consultation, that we follow in terms of that process appropriately? And I can indicate the provincial treasuries, the national treasuries, they also provide support in a lot of instances where municipalities ask support for them to formulate targets and indicators if there's a struggle in that regard, because that could be one area where you can get the finding. Because if you get a finding to say, we cannot measure this, then that is the first part. The second part is on the reliability side. And what would be critically important here is the standard operating procedures that you've got in place. So, and the challenge that we find a lot of times that when municipalities now go and measure the performance, there is no standard operating procedure in place to say, when I'm going to collect this data, this is how I'm going to go about collecting the data. And that is the crux of where the challenges comes a lot of time. So if you clearly define from the start, when I'm actually going to collect this data, this is how I'm going to collect the data, then that will assist. On top of that, internal audit does play an important role in this information, performance information. And this is the role that they can play to say, before this information is submitted to council, when it comes to the IDP processes and on a yearly basis, we do a review. We do this assessment, looking at the information, and they also have to quarterly look at the reliability of the information. So here, you can utilize also your internal auditors to provide you that type of oversight before AGSA then comes and do the audit when it comes to some of those performance information. On the issue of consequence management and any prosecution from our side, as AGSA, maybe just to clarify, we don't prosecute from our side. But what we do refer specific MIs for further investigation to public bodies. We've seen actually a lot where we've referred specifically relating to the PPE during COVID-19, where we've actually referred matters to the SIU. We've actually seen a lot of those things that we've identified and where people were then held to account in those instances. But from our side, we don't prosecute, but in instances, we do refer specific matters when we feel there is some fraud risk indicator or the accounting officers involved, then we would normally refer the matter. So based on what we've referred previously and a lot of that in terms of the PPE work that we've done, we have seen some consequences that happens in that regard. Then the last part I just wanted to add on and relating to the roles that some of the managers on the ground when it comes to supply chain management, because we do still find quite a bit of findings in the area of supply chain management, and mainly where proper procurement processes are not followed. And in the area specifically where we find a lot of findings where there's deviations from the procurement process, where something comes to an end, so now it needs to go out on tender, but they deviate from the process. And that is a lot of cases where there's not proper planning that happens at municipality to say, let's basically plan for our procurement for the next 5 years and know at certain stages what must happen. And I do believe the SCM managers has a critically important role to play in terms of planning the procurement for the municipalities over a period of time. So when contracts, and that's the other challenge that we do find on the ground, on the contract management side and how contracts are managed on the ground. So a lot of times that we find just generally contracts is always in the favor of the suppliers and not in the favor of government. So that is also an area I think that can be looked at. And secondly, when those contracts, because a lot of times the contracts are not centrally filed, but it is basically done with in each service area. So as a result of that, there's no proper records in place to say, within 2 months' time, the refuse removal contract is going to expire, or within a year time, let's already do our planning in advance. So I do believe that is a key role that supply chain managers can play in terms of the planning process when it comes to procurement, and that will also assist when that proper planning is done to have this reduction of irregular expenditure, making sure that the procurement prescripts then are then fulfilled. That's you, Pandile.
Okay, the last round of questions, because our time is running out, but just to allow the people to get the answers. Barbara Guccini is saying, why is Treasury not enforcing the 8% minimum for operations and maintenance? Okay. Then the next one says, I don't have the name. We're aware that the AG does not put reliance on internal audits. As official, we have found that the AG auditors are somewhat reasonable to deal with than internal auditors. Are there any plans of the AG overseeing internal audit work? Okay. And there's one that's a comment, which I think is a good initiative from the provinces. Nono Bapila says, some provinces have initiatives of taking the provincial departments CFOs on a workshop to prepare financial statements with the intention to address the errors misstatement raised from previous audits. So that's a very good initiative to try and address. Maybe the municipalities can actually adopt that system. And then the next question says, what role does the provincial treasury's COPTA MFMA section play in assisting the municipality in preparing annual financial statements? So since this is a last round, I will take all the rest of the questions. Yeah, there's not much left now. Okay, so the next one says, we have observed with concern AGSA spirit of auditing the Circular 88 reform inconsistently with the C88 reform spirit of progressive realization of the standards. Okay. And then adding on the AOPO, is AGSA encouraging a 5-point scoring or 2-point, whereby we only report on targets achieved as per SDBIP? Then the last one, sorry for the marathon. The questions asked are not, okay, the Hakeso says, the questions asked are not understood properly, or what they seek to clarify is not understood, judging by the responses provided. Okay, I felt that the questions were, you addressed all the questions, so maybe let's answer the last few questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pandile. So the first question about the 8% and National Treasury enforced that, and I do think that this was probably something that they need to look at, and we have reported it, and we've also alerted this concern to National Treasury in terms of the spending on the maintenance of infrastructure specifically, because the norm is there, the norm is 8%. But actually, when it comes to the implementation part of it, that is where the challenge is. No? The next one on the internal audit, and what I want to put out there is, if you are internal auditor on the call or please challenge us. No? Please challenge us in this area, and I wanna put it out there. In terms of the utilization of your work, as the standard indicates, how do we utilize internal audits work? I do believe by us talking to each other and doing appropriate planning in advance, and be clear in terms of what is the key objectives that we must achieve. I've seen it in the past that we have used internal audits work in some of the areas. In some of the areas, unfortunately, for example, on supply chain management, especially when we've got a significant risk, when we go back to our auditing standards, it's very clear that we cannot use internal audits work in those risky areas. But there is areas I do believe we can talk, we can collaborate. So please continue knocking on our doors for these things, no? To hold us to account, and not just brush it off. No? There is guidance from our side in terms of what are the areas and where we can do, but I do find a lot of time we don't early engage with each other solve it. But it's definitely better collaboration between the two of us will make everything much better and much stronger. Né? So I do put the challenge out there. The next one, in terms of the initiatives, I think I support that one that you've indicated. You take everybody together. I think that's brilliant. I hope a lot of people has listened to that call. Then about the role of PT and COCTA, and definitely they've got a key role to play, specifically PT when it comes from the financial statement side. And also COCTA from the performance side, they've got a role to play in terms of that oversight role that they've got to play. So, and that's why we started then to start looking at these role players and what their role is and the effectiveness and the impact. And in all the provinces, actually, we've reported to the various key role players where we see their role and what are the challenges. So these things has been communicated to the various provincial treasuries and the local COCTAs in the various area of where those areas of improvement can come when it comes to the oversight on the AFS part and on the performance information part of it. The next one, I think I wasn't sure if it was just a comment on the Circular 88, because I did share what was the intention of that work, and that it was definitely not for punitive in nature, but more to see where we can actually give more recommendation in terms of improving the process, taking into account that metros had challenges, and when it actually is going to be rolled out to the rest of the other municipalities. So it was more from that perspective that we come from. On the 5-point scoring system, yeah, I'm not sure to be honest. But I think important when we normally audit and report, whatever you've set yourself out to do, originally, we normally would audit against what you have set yourself out to do and determine based on what you have set yourself out that you achieve it at the end of the day. And that's basically how we would do the audit from our perspective. Pandelia, I hope I've responded now to all your questions. Thanks.
Thank you so much. You did respond to all of them. Thank you for taking the time. We can take a breather while we do now a report back on the Mentimeter. I'm going to ask my colleague to please share the screen so we can see what has been the responses on the Mentimeter. So we asked question, do you think that your municipality is making life easier for you? We're not going to read all of them, just take a few. So not at all. We often struggle with power outages due to increased infrastructure development and lack of upgrades, feeding cables. So no, it's not. The turnaround time request is very long. So we can just say, I'm hoping the people are reading and seeing that the responses are really not positive when it looks at municipality making life easier. So us as these public servants on this platform, we need to take this and be able to try and improve, because we're all about service delivery. Let's take the next question. We asked, okay. The next question was, what does this mean for small businesses, macro enterprises of cities, those that are investing, grading? Says infrastructure will deteriorate further within the city, development will stagnate, investment will decline. Someone says it's bad, means that they can't strive to do best, or some will close down. They have to close their doors with no future revival inside. No one will want to start a business, and everything will look, so it's not a good picture on this. So we need to make sure that our local businesses have a grounding, a space where they can perform very well. And last question. Okay, what role do you think the NSG can play? NSG can incorporate the audit outcomes into its curriculum and in creating a case study, can make officials more aware of doing the right thing on the right time, more ethical awareness to all, provide more education and training to municipal employees, offer annual workshops for senior managers and executives to refresh audit auditors' expectations and the purpose of audit outcomes, and so on. Because of time, I'm not going to read more. I need to hand over to my colleague, Dr. Buchabela Maja, to thank our speaker and to close the session. But we've noted especially the recommendation on what the NSG needs to do. We will act on that and be able to assist. We're here to assist, and we want to be able to be visible at the local government space and help them to improve. Thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you very much, DDG Mkwanazi. Colleagues, this has been quite an interesting session. But the problem with us South Africans is that sometimes we do this as if we are just complying. You know, we attend these webinars and we talk and we ask questions and we go home and sleep. One of the biggest problems we have as South Africans, we never pause to think and to reflect. At the core of what Sharon was sharing with us is this thing that she calls an accountability ecosystem. I think it was slide number 3. So Sharon says there is this accountability ecosystem. At the center of that ecosystem that Sharon was talking about is this thing that she calls active citizenry. So she uses the word active citizenry. All of us, all 90 people who are here, including the 57 million people who are not here, who are calling themselves South Africans, are part of this active citizenry that Sharon says is core to this accountability ecosystem. So what are the takeaways? For me, there are 3 things that shocked me, and it's a Friday afternoon, so maybe over a glass of whiskey or wine this afternoon, you need to reflect. It struck me that in South Africa at municipal level, based on what Sharon was saying, you can remove the screen, we hire employees to hire consultants. We hire employees to hire consultants. I mean, how funny can that sound? We hire employees to hire consultants. I mean, that really struck me. I'm going to think about this tonight. But the second point she makes is that we are poor at planning, we are poor at implementing, and we are also poor at reporting. So I asked myself, so what are we good at? Because if you can't plan and implement and report, what can you do? I mean, we must just step back tonight, you know, when you're having that glass of whiskey and just think, what does it mean? What does it mean? At municipal level, this is our service delivery engine as a country. We can't plan, we can't implement, we can't report. But what really hit me hard is the third point. Because Sharon makes one point, it has 2 parts. He says one, she says one, we've incurred in this financial year that she's talking about, we've incurred almost 4 billion rands in irregular expenditure, material irregularities that she calls, nearly 4 billion. But then she says, in 81% of those cases that are of the 4 billion material irregularities, no action was undertaken. 81% of 4 billion, no action was undertaken. I mean, 4 billion, you can build more than 500,000 RDP houses with that money. You can build more than 500,000 RDP houses with that money. So I just thought, let me start there. That's really the first thing I want to do. Think and reflect tonight when you go back home and you are in your home, when you have that glass of whiskey, what does this mean? But as a National School of Government, yes, colleagues are saying we must do this, we must do that, and we do want to do things. If you can enable my sharing, I just want to show you what we are doing. We are doing things so that we are able to build the capabilities and the capacity of the public service to be able to do the things it must do. We are saying, let us have execution diligence so that we are able to plan, we are able to implement, and we are also able to make sure that we report. So we must have that execution diligence that we talk about. We say we need to make sure that we can have ethical leadership and executive oversight. We ran this program recently with the Buffalo municipality on ethical leadership and executive oversight program. And we really want to see more and more of our municipalities joining us in terms of that program. If you look at all these mandated and bespoke programs of the National School of Government, we would really like as many of our public sector employees to join and walk this road with us. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for sharing the stage and these conversations with us. Let us be the solutions. Let us make sure that we play our part in this accountability ecosystem that Sharon was talking about. I can call this webinar closed, and thank you very much. Enjoy your Friday.